Now for today's program. Janice Rothschild Blumberg is an author and speaker on American Jewish history, particularly Southern Jewish history. A native of Atlanta, Janice has experienced Jewish history firsthand as the wife, now widow, of two outspoken Jewish leaders, Rabbi Jacob Rothschild, spiritual leader of the temple which was bombed in 1958, and David Blumberg, civic leader and international president of B'nai B'rith in the 1970s. During World War II, Janice worked for the Army Corps of Engineers in the Panama Canal Zone to combat malaria and served the Signal Corps in Washington, D.C. She also spent time in Mexico attending the Experiment in International Living. Janice has held leadership positions in numerous organizations, including the B'nai B'rith Klutznik National Jewish Museum, and served as president of the Southern Jewish Historical Society. She has lectured at universities, synagogues, museums, and academic conferences across the country, and has written articles for the Encyclopedia Judaica, Southern Jewish History, the Atlanta Journal, and Constitution Sunday Magazine, among other publications. She is the author of many books, including One Voice, Rabbi Jacob Rothschild and the Troubled South, and Prophet in a Time of Priests, about the life of her great-grandfather, Rabbi Brown, who arrived in the United States during post-Civil War Reconstruction. Her latest book, What's Next? Southern Dreams, Jewish Deeds, and the Challenge of Looking Back While Moving Forward, is set to be released in the coming months. Joining Janice today is Nadine Epstein, an award-winning journalist and author. She has been the editor-in-chief and CEO of Moment Magazine since 2004 and is the founder and executive director of the Center for Creative Change. Nadine is the editor of Elie Wiesel and Extraordinary Life and Legacy. Her most recent book is RBG's Brave and Brilliant Women, 33 Jewish Women to Inspire Everyone, which she wrote in collaboration with the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Please welcome Janice Rothschild Blumberg and Nadine Epstein.
Hi, everyone. And so I'm getting to talk to Janice, who I've known for years and who is a special friend to me. And I just want to let everybody know, she's going to actually be 90. She's our oldest person we've ever had on one of our programs. She's going to be 98 on February 13th. And I've known her for years, but yet I've been reading her book over the last few days, and I have learned so much from that book, What's Next? And I highly recommend this book for all sorts of reasons. She's had adventures and really thoughtful engagements with the world that were way ahead of her time. She is like a Zelig. She appears, she is suddenly in the middle of so many fascinating things happening in the world. One of those periods, of course, was between 1960 and 1968, when she was married to Rabbi Rothschild, and they were living in Atlanta. And we're going to mostly focus on those years today, but we're going to talk about a few other things as well. So I'm going to start with Atlanta, Janice. You grew up there, and just give us a little sense of what it was like for Jews and Blacks in Atlanta when you were coming up in the world, and you were born in 1924, and if your paths crossed. And let's just start with the Jews a little bit. Jews were they were afraid. Leo Frank had happened. There were certain things going on. What was it like to be a young Jew in Atlanta?
Well, the Leo Frank case had traumatized the Jews who had lived in Atlanta at that time. That was 1913 to 1915. And it was still, it was like a lingering boil to the people who remembered it. But nobody spoke of it. If anybody asked a question, they were silenced almost immediately. So it wasn't something that people talked about at all. What was the rest of the question?
Well, what was it like to be Jewish at that point in Atlanta when you were coming up through the 30s and the 40s and the 50s? Was there people, was there anti-Semitism? Were people afraid of speaking out? What was going on?
Well, I think basically people were afraid to speak out. First of all, the Jewish community was divided as almost as sharply as the racial community. And I can't speak for the people who were not part of the Reform German background, third generation Americans. They probably had much different feelings than ours. We felt we felt comfortable, but with an underlying point or aspect of not feeling completely comfortable. You know what I mean?
Yes.
We thought we were, but I think if anybody pinched us or pricked us with a pin, it would have come out that we weren't all that comfortable. I don't think we realized this ourselves. That's why I'm saying it that way.
That's really insightful. So what about the African-American community? What was it like for them in the 40s and the 50s? When we're right before, I know we're going to get to 1960 soon, but what was it like in the decades before that?
I didn't catch the last of what you asked.
What was it like for the African-American community during the 1940s and the 1950s?
Well, we certainly still had Jim Crow. I think most Jewish people, the ones I knew, had very good relationships with their hired help. However, don't forget now, we didn't meet anybody of our own level, intellectual or social level. That came much later. And now this was not completely true. It was true of everybody I knew personally. But later, after I met Rabbi Rothschild and we began to meet more people of the total community, I realized that there had always, since emancipation, had been an intellectual, an academic community of African Americans and whites that knew each other and did get along very well.
So 1946, Rabbi Jacob Rothschild moves to Atlanta to take over as the new young rabbi at the temple in Atlanta, which is the big Reform synagogue. And you meet him in 1946, and you actually also get married that year or shortly afterwards. And he brings a whole new message to the synagogue. Tell us a little bit about his expectations of what he wanted for Jews in Atlanta that shocked everyone.
Well, I probably wouldn't wanted to do and did things that shocked people, but I'm not quite sure what they were. Actually, the rabbi, I suppose you would say, shocked people. He came out, the first thing that shocked, you might say, or surprised people in the congregation was not that he came out for civil rights, because they didn't even notice that in those days. The first thing was that he found that our congregation was sadly ignorant about its own heritage, and he wanted to make us understand more about the total Jewish community and of the world, for that matter. And that was what surprised the congregation first. And then they realized that bit by bit, like little drops on a stone, which he realized was the only way to do it, he came into the civil rights conversation with the congregation.
So you actually mentioned somewhere that his High Holidays sermon, the second year he was there, was about civil rights.
Oh, it wasn't about civil rights, heavens. no, he got in a word or two about civil rights, but that first holiday sermon services, the congregation didn't notice that. They noticed that he was talking about Palestine and statehood, the fact that Jews needed their own country, things like that really perked up their interest, because the rabbi whom he succeeded, who raised 3 generations of us, Rabbi Marx, had been in the congregation since 1895 and had raised a congregation mostly of anti-Zionists. So the first thing that Rabbi Rothschild used to say, that Dr. Marx felt that his mission was to make Americans out of his Jewish first and second generation Jews. And Rothschild then had to get Marx's Americans and make Jews out of them. So that was his mission, long before civil rights became a feature. He spoke on civil rights, but people didn't notice that as much then as they did gradually as the years went on.
And you said he also became part of a group of leaders, of religious leaders that were white and Black, that began to meet, like it was this dinner group, right? That met, was that a little bit later?
Well, I don't think they, he undoubtedly met with the African-American leadership then, because there were organizations of, across the racial divide that was trying to bring people together long before Rabbi Rothschild even came to Atlanta. But he certainly joined and was very active with them, and gradually brought the congregation to understand more of what was going on.
Okay, so in 1958, the temple is bombed, and that becomes a huge national story. And you mentioned when we were talking earlier that the bombing of the temple helps to bring the kind of Black Jewish community, all the kind of religious communities together, because everyone's so horrified at the bombing.
Yes, but I didn't mean to give the impression that it had any different effect on the African-American community. There was, well, from the time Rabbi Rothschild came, there was always a closeness with the African-American leaders. And actually, there was, even before his time, on a very individual basis. I know that there were leaders in the congregation, and Dr. Marx too, for that matter, who worked to bring the communities together.
Well, let's go to 1960. So in 1960, Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King moved to Atlanta. He's leading the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He's the first president. And how do you and your husband get to know the Kings? When did you first meet them?
Well, Daddy King and Mama King too, for that matter, were active in the community before Martin ever came back to live in Atlanta. The rabbi had an annual meeting of the clergy, a day-long seminar for the Christian clergy at the temple each year. And then I began to bring a similar one with the women from their congregations also, and from the sisterhood, before Martin ever came back to Atlanta. So we knew them. And then, there wasn't socializing across the racial lines. And this wasn't because we didn't want to, but people are, particularly clergymen, are busy. And in fact, once Coretta and I did meet and try to get together for a date to have dinner together, it took us 6 months to get a date that both of our husbands were free to do that.
Let's
So-
first go to the first time you met them. So there was like 1 or 2 restaurants in Atlanta at the time where people of different races and religions met. One of those restaurants you told me was Pascal's. So didn't you go, and what happened going to Pascal's? Your mom?
Well, I've never been to Pascal's, but didn't
your mom
That's
invite
true.
you there?
my
Oh.
mother was
Your mother
the
met
one
them
who
first.
was having lunch with. I'm sorry,
No, your mother.
something's happened to them.
We can hear you.
Oh.
You're fine.
Well, my mother was having lunch at Pascal's with she had a Swedish journalist visiting her who wanted to meet some African-American leaders. And Mother's very good friend was Grace Hamilton, who was an African-American leader. And so Grace took them to Pascal's for lunch. And well, when Dr. King came in, he came over to the table to say hello to Grace and was introduced to the others and sat down. And when my mother found out that his wife, that Coretta, was a musician, which mother was a piano teacher and was very much into everything musical in Atlanta. So she immediately set up a dinner party to introduce Coretta and Martin to a few of her good friends, including her children. And that's when I met them.
Okay. So you met them for the first time then. And then, so you told me that and this is the story really struck with me. You told me this story years ago that you decided to have a dinner party at your house, and you invite Coretta and Martin Luther King Jr. to come to dinner. What happens?
Oh, well, they were quite late. And I, of course, told him it was perfectly all right. But Martin insisted on giving me the full explanation of what happened. And it was because he didn't want to embarrass me. He wanted me to know that he didn't embarrass me with my neighbors. Well, now, when you think of this, it sort of...
So he couldn't...
It puts a lump in my throat. What happened was that they couldn't find the number on the street, and they had to go into somebody's house to ask which house was ours. And he said, I let Coretta go to the door so they wouldn't see me and they would think we had just come to serve a party. And that's the way it was in Buckhead, Atlanta in those days. I didn't realize it.
So Buckhead was a place where African Americans didn't come after dark unless they were working. But you didn't realize this. Yeah.
Apparently that was so, but I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you were interested in that being the case, which we certainly weren't, there was no way that you would have been in a conversation to know what was happening.
So when you met Martin Luther King, well, what was he like as a person?
Well, he was a wonderful, dear, low-key person. And of course, we all know that he was aware at the time of what an icon he was, because he used this influence to further his mission. But you would certainly never have known it from meeting him socially. I mean, he was low-key and answered people's questions because, of course, everybody had a question for him, but certainly did not act as if he knew he were important.
So after you have this dinner party, Coretta Scott King decides she wants to invite you over for lunch. Well, what happens at that lunch? Tell us about that lunch and what happens at that lunch with Dr. King.
You're talking about the lunch that Coretta had?
Yeah, the lunch that Coretta had. Yes.
Yeah, well, she invited a few people, women a few, it was about 20, which would have been quite a big luncheon. Martin drove the carpool and brought the children home upstairs, nowhere near the party. Then he came in to speak and to everybody and sat with us for a while and talked. And I just thought that was so gracious of him. He was a very busy man. And I could just picture my husband taking the carpool because I was having a luncheon. Now,
So it wasn't an era, it wasn't a time where men were doing things like that, and he was helping.
No, they didn't. Well, granted, this was a luncheon honoring and introducing Zenona Clayton, who has since become known throughout Atlanta on her own right, and was known in California on her own right at that time. But they were moving to Atlanta, and the idea for her husband to work with King, and so the idea was to introduce her to some of the white community, which was what Coretta did.
So in 1964, I think it is, Martin Luther King Jr. wins the Nobel Prize, and you, your husband and you want to help organize some kind of celebration for that, and there's a plan for a dinner, which I think is like, maybe is it one of the first integrated dinners that's ever been held in Atlanta, and it was very controversial. Tell us a little bit about the controversy about this.
Well, it was the first public dinner that had ever been held in Atlanta, interracial. Well, the controversy was that not everybody loved and honored King in those days the way we did. And it was important that it was important to have it, but it was also important to have it go well, which might not have been so smooth had the public learned of it before everything was in place. There was a committee. There were 4 men, Ralph McGill, the editor, and my husband, and Archbishop Paul Hallinan, and Dr. Benjamin Mays of Morehouse College, who was really King's teacher, mentor, and so on. My husband came home from a meeting one day that this committee had with the mayor, and told me about it, said, we're going to have this dinner and we need to give Martin a nice gift, not just a certificate. What do you think he should have? Right away, I thought, oh, Coretta with 4 children and as busy as she is and no household help, she doesn't need another piece of silver to keep clean. So right away I said, well, not silver. He said, okay, that's what people gave in those days. And he said, what? I said, oh, well, you can, Steuben glass, crystal can be engraved on. So, okay, the next day he came back from a meeting with the committee, including Mayor Ivan Allen, and he says, Ivan says, that's a good idea, get it. Who, me? So there we had a little bit of a problem because, as I say, everybody in Atlanta wasn't thrilled that King had been given the Nobel Prize. So we wanted this to, the PR people with us had to be very careful about how everything was presented publicly. And I knew that I didn't want to go to locally to get this. So I called New York, and this was like the middle of December, and the dinner was set for the middle of January. And when I called Steuben and got the vice president on the line and told him what I wanted, and he said, I don't know even if we could get get it done for you in that length of time, because you know, we're in the midst of Christmas business now. The engravers have a holiday after Christmas because they've been working so hard. So, but let me see what I can do. And okay, and I said, well, with great trepidation, because I knew what my budget was, and whatever it was, I said, so, you know, how much do you think this will cost? And I'm going to pick figures now. These are not the precise figures, but it's enough to give the idea, right? He said $600 when $300 was our budget. So I kind of gulped and said, well, he said, but I don't even know if I can get it for you. Call me back tomorrow. So I called him. And meanwhile, I called Ivan Allen, the mayor. And Ivan said, you get it, no matter what it costs, I'll pay the difference if I need to. We're going to do this thing right. So I think that says a lot about our mayor. I don't know what we would have done without somebody at his caliber at the time.
So the ball, you get the ball, and it turns out the dinner is an amazing success. That I think you were mentioning that everybody suddenly, once people learned about it, it was so hard to get a ticket.
Oh yeah, but also I forgot one interesting point about the bowl. When I got the call the next day, and the guy from Subin said that they could do it. The price he gave me was the price that we had, that we could afford, not, you know, it was discounted by half because it was the king. So that was really nice.
Well, you mentioned that the bowl is at the museum, the memorial in Atlanta, the King Memorial
Center, yeah,
King Center in Atlanta. So
yeah.
tell us the right before the event, Coretta calls you. Why does Coretta call you before the dinner?
Well, she took a long time for me to find out what she really called me about. She was asking me ostensibly what I was going to wear. And, you know, in those days when we had so many dinners that we had to have long dresses for, I had one long black skirt and different tops to go with it. So, you know, I told her something like that. And, but she stayed on the line talking about clothes. Now, this was not like Coretta. And I couldn't figure out what in the world she was really getting at until finally it came out. She didn't want to embarrass any of their congregation by being better dressed than they could afford to be. Boy, she finally let me know what she was talking about. I said, Coretta, are you out of your mind? You're supposed to look better than anybody else there. You will, you know, she was a concert artist, so I knew she had beautiful, beautiful gowns. And so I said, look, do you think the Queen of England worries about whether she looks better than the people on the street? You wear what you've got and don't worry about it. Well, of course, everybody was thrilled to see her. And actually, one of the reporters who caught my eye and couldn't get anyone else's, after the dinner asked me to describe her dress because it was so beautiful. And you can see a little bit of it in the picture, this iconic picture.
So you're sitting at the main table, you and Rabbi Rothschild and the Kings, and at another table is his parents, Dr. King's parents and their children, and your children at another table. And how that photo, which is so beautiful. You all look so happy in the photo. I mean, each person, Dr. King is beaming. Coretta is beaming. You are beaming. You know, Rabbi Rothschild is
That's the way
smiling.
We feel.
It's an amazing moment. Who takes that photo? How does that photo happen?
My son, Bill Rothschild, when he was, about 15 years old at most, with his Browning camera, our families, so we were on a dais that was raised, and our families were on at the table that was perpendicular to the center of the dais. Mm-hmm. And of course, our own families, our our mothers and children were the closest up to us. And so Bill just took out his Browning camera and took it. And it really has gone places since.
So in the next few years, next 4 years, I mean, is there kind of a partnership between the Jewish community or the temple and your husband, and also the leaders in the Black community, including Dr. King and his father, to sort of fight racism and to fight anti-Semitism? These are both scourges of what's going on. I mean, was there a sense of working together at this period?
Well, there had been, since long before Rabbi Rothschild came to Atlanta, a one-on-one with the clergy, keeping the races together, at least on that level. We started what was going on, I think, throughout Reform Judaism, and possibly with others as well in those days, which was to have a committee of congregational members who worked on interfaith relations. I can't give you any details of that, but they were working on, I mean, ever since.
Okay. Well, so on April 4th, 1968, where are you? How do you learn about the horrible news? Where are you when you learn about Dr. King's assassination? And what are you thinking?
Of course, we were horrified, but not surprised. He knew. And I think he even mentioned once in my presence that he and Coretta understood that something like this would probably happen. And they had, they had tried to prepare themselves, and certainly their older children, for it. I don't know even that Marty was old enough to have been prepared for it, but I think probably Yolanda was. But I don't know.
But where were you when you heard the news?
We were home listening to the news. And Father Burtonshaw, who was the aide to the Archbishop, who himself was actually mortally ill and in the hospital. But Father Burtonshaw came over to pick up my husband and go over to see Coretta. And they wouldn't let me go with them because they were afraid that there might be violence in the city going through town to her house. And actually they encountered nothing like that, although, the whole world knows what was going on in other cities, but Atlanta was quiet.
Well, what did they find when they got to the house?
They found her absolutely alone and calm and collected and really glad to see them. But, I still am surprised when to realize that she was completely alone. I mean, after all, they had family. They certainly had friends, they had congregation, but that's the way they found her, completely alone.
With the kids at home.
Yeah, Coretta.
So when do you go over? You go over to see her. What happens when you go over to see her? What, do you go the next day or the next couple of weeks? What?
Well, no, we knew not to go. I knew not to go the next day because she went to bring his body home. But on Saturday, I went with my good friend whose name then was Billy Williams. She lost her husband a year or so after that, and she's been married for many years now to the ball player Hank Williams. I'm Hank Aaron. Anyway, Billy and I went together, And Coretta wasn't home, but we sat in the car for a long time afterwards talking about it and sort of, sharing our grief with each other. And I told her about the saying in Jewish lore, because of our great philosopher, Rabbi Moses Maimonides, I think 10th century, that there was a saying that from Moses the prophet, Moses to Moses, there was no one like Moses. And I said, I really think that future generations of Christians are going to say, from Martin Luther to Martin Luther, there was no one like Martin Luther. And she looked at me, she rolled her eyes and said, when you know somebody that well, it's hard to think of the person as being an icon for the ages. And come to think of it, I'm not so sure that we would be celebrating his holiday and that he would be for the ages in the sense that he is now, if it were not for the work that Coretta did. Coretta worked relentlessly to get that holiday. It didn't just come about because he deserved it.
So you stayed in touch with Coretta. You, I know Rabbi Rothschild died. You eventually remarried David Blumberg, who was the director of the International B'nai B'rith, and you moved to Washington, D.C. And Coretta would come to D.C. to help lobby for the holiday. And tell us about one of the visits when she was with you.
When I called her to help us at a book party. Well, Coretta had written the introduction for me for the book that I wrote about my husband, Rabbi Rothschild. And so a friend of ours in Washington said she would like to have a book party for us, for me, for the book, but she wanted to have it at a time that Coretta would be there too. So we did that. And it was very exciting. Oh, and the other thing that our friend particularly wanted to do was to have an equal, have her guest list equally divided racially. She felt that, it had been too long since we did anything with these beliefs that we had about, being one family. And so that's what she did. It was a wonderful day. And I loved having Coretta stay overnight with us. But the next day, this may interest your listeners, the next day when she had to go someplace, and I said, well, tell me where and I'll take you. She said, oh no. She said, you can't even take me downstairs in the building. I can't leave your unit now that I'm here officially, because she was there, to lobby Congress. She said, I can't even leave your unit until the Secret Service comes to get me. That's how bad things were in those days. So,
wow. Well, what do you think? Here we are in a rather polarized time in the United States. What do you think, where race is remains a very serious issue, that Martin Luther King would think about what's happening today in America?
well, he would certainly be sad, but I think he would realize that progress is not made in a straight line. You have to go back 2 steps for every 3 that you take. And that's the way I see it. And I think he would see it that way too. If you really look at the overall picture and try to have an aerial view of it, we have made progress. We've made a lot of progress. We just haven't made it nearly as much as we'd like. But I see a great deal of progress.
So who inspires you today? Like, are there leaders today that, you look at them and you feel like they've inherited some of the mantle of Dr. King, that people who make you feel positive, optimistic about the future of race relations, and in this country?
Well, that is certainly one of the very wonderful gifts that he gave us. He gave his people the strength, the inner strength to go on with what they were doing and bring more people into it. Maybe take steps that he wouldn't have been able to take in his day. But if you really look at the overall picture, we've made a lot of progress. It just isn't nearly as much as we'd like.
Well, there are a few people that inspire you with what they're doing today, like few leaders in the African American community.
Leaders who have inspired me?
Yes, like we were talked earlier about this a little bit. You were talking about Stacey Abrams and how you were talking about Stacey Abrams.
Oh, today.
Yes.
Well, she certainly inspires me today. I would love to meet her because she's my hero today. But I haven't met her. But I just don't think she's terrific. And we need much more of her and many more like her.
And are there other leaders today that have made differences in, you had mentioned Obama, President Obama, Michelle Obama, you know.
Oh, well, yeah, I think the Obamas were, they're my heroes also. And incidentally, I think that one of the reasons that we're seeing the bad part of that issue that we're seeing today is that it's a reaction to them. It's a backlash, which we can expect because that's what happens when you have progress. You have a lot of people that are going to fight back and be nasty, but you still make the progress.
So when I was reading your book, I was also thinking about your book. Your book is about so many things, and it's very much about, racial reckoning and coming together to work, Jews and Blacks coming together to work for civil rights. But there's many other sections of your book and many other adventures that you had in your life. But throughout, I kept thinking about that your book is also about your generation's gradual awakening, that women could be more than housewives. I mean, you say something in there, well, we knew about, at a certain point, we knew about Betty Friedan, we knew about some of these feminists, but we weren't ready to listen to them. Tell us a little bit about your awakening as, you were always a smart, independent, curious woman who was learning and doing interesting things and working, but yet, you got married in 1946 and quite some of that was, kind of shut down. Tell us a little bit about the gradual awakening here. And
well, I feel that I've lived several different lives. Well, I'm 98 years old, so it's time enough to have divided it up some. And I've had just I can thank my both husbands, but particularly Rabbi Rothschild, who did a lot to making me grow up and see the world in a much more three-dimensional way. But I've tried to learn, and I think I have learned from everything that happened to me in life. And so my first life, so to speak, was that I think of as during the war, when I had experiences living in different places and doing different kinds of work. One period was in Washington, and that was a very very educational period of my life. And then, of course, being married to Rabbi Rothschild was tremendous when it came to seeing the world and what things were all about. He had an uncanny sense of geopolitics. And so, I was just very lucky and having two wonderful men fall in love with me.
Well, more than that.
Not simultaneously, so,
Yeah, and those were happened to be the only two you married, but there were other ones in between too, which were also in the book, which is quite interesting. So, you're going to be 98 on February 13th. Is there something that you would tell yourself? Something you would like to tell yourself as a 17-year-old? Some piece of wisdom that you would like to share with your 17-year-old self and us about how life.
Curiosity. If I had one gift to give to my grandson, it would be curiosity, because in fact that's why I think I call my book "What's Next," because if you always are excited about what's next and eager to know, even though common sense tells you that it could be bad, it might not be always what you want. It probably won't be all the time. But if you have curiosity about meeting it, to me, that's the secret that I would like to carry on with me and give to others.
Well, there's a few questions here we've actually run over because it's so interesting talking to you. And before we even go to the questions, I just want to tell everyone that really reading Denise's book is learning about these many, like a whole number of chapters of history, not, geopolitical history, whether it's there, so many eras. And you do watch her it's true, her passion for the world and her curiosity, which is what keeps her continually going. It's like it never stops. That curiosity is always with her. So that's one of the things that makes the book so inspirational. And I think the book comes out next month, right? Is that it?
It comes out when my publisher gets enough paper.
Well, all books are in COVID limbo, but it's coming out very soon. So you should keep your eye out for it.
Yeah, blame COVID.
Well, COVID, it's your book and so many other books. Our current issue of Woman is also going to be late, thanks to the many, many aspects of Omicron. The Omicron overlords. Suzanne, would you like to ask some of these questions?
Yes. First of all, I want to say thank you. And so many people have said how inspiring listening to you it has been this last hour. So thank you. The first question is a year ago, Jon Ossoff was sworn into Congress as a senator from Georgia, and he used a very special Bible. I believe he used your husband's Bible. How did that come about, and how did that make you feel that he was being sworn into the Senate with that?
Well, of course, we were thrilled. All the more thrilling because we've never met him, and I've met his mother now, but I really just came out of the blue, and it was so exciting. And actually, what he used to be sworn in with was not the Bible, but the Chumash, which my son had and loaned to him because he wanted something with Hebrew. And of course, the Chumash has the Hebrew, and the Bible that my husband used didn't. It was all in English. So.
Thank you. Somebody asked if you could share the real driving Miss Daisy story.
The driving Miss Daisy story. Well, first of all, the real Miss Daisy, who was cousin Lena to me, she was my great grandmother's first cousin, but I grew up calling her cousin Lena. And she happened to be the first baby named in the temple, in the first Jewish congregation building, not the one we have now, but the very first synagogue building in Atlanta. And on the day of its dedication, one of the things that happened was that she was named there. And the family has had a long line of people, of members of the family involved in the congregation, starting actually the rabbi who named her and dedicated the temple was my great-grandfather, about whom I wrote the book, Prophet in a Time of Priests. So I feel very close to driving Miss Daisy, and of course, giving the author credit. I'm very proud to be related to Alfred Uhrig. We're all proud to know him. But that's my connection.
Wonderful. Somebody would like to know if they ever caught the, excuse me, if they ever caught the person who placed the bomb at the temple.
They never specifically did, but the law enforcement had been watching this group of people for a long time, and there were a number of reasons why they weren't able to prove it in court, but they pretty well know that it was either George Bright himself was the one who was indicted and tried for it, or part of his group, somebody else among the, I think, 4 people who were involved in this group, that one of them did.
But they were acquitted, right?
Oh yeah, they were.
And didn't
but they were watched carefully. They weren't going to get into any more trouble for the rest of their lives, believe me.
Really? So you testified, though. Weren't you called to testify in the trial?
Yes, I did. That was quite an exciting and pretty horrifying time. Also, in the second trial, the defense attorney that they had was very good at his job. He was known to be outrageous, and he was quite outrageous with me, so much so that when the trial was over, my husband said to me, "I'll bet the accused goes free and his attorney goes to jail for contempt of court for the way he treated you." And that was exactly what happened.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
But it was interesting. It would make a very good play. There was a play that used part of this, but I'd like to see something.
Okay, Janice, you've got your next project.
Well, maybe.
I think so. Let's talk. We'll talk about that offline.
I'm sorry.
We can talk about that offline. But so what is your next project?
My next project, well, my next project is, once I get my book, I want to be able to sell it. So I would love to be going, different places, giving book talks. I love meeting people, and I know, also love selling books. But I wouldn't rule out writing another one if I live that long. I keep thinking I shouldn't be telling people how old I am, because I might want to go on JDate. It would be limited.
Well, I can tell people that they can pre-order the book on Amazon. And so as soon as it does get published, they will be able to receive it. Also, if there's anybody out there, I think a wonderful birthday present for Janice would be to have a meeting with Stacey Abrams. So I'm going to plug that if anybody can help make that happen. And I want to thank you so much for joining us. As I said, everybody is just saying how inspiring today has been, and we look forward to hearing more from you. I want to remind everybody to go to momentmag.com, and you can sign up for next week's program about Henry Kissinger. I will be sending a follow-up email later this week with a link to the recording, as well as a link to Denise's book. And I'm going to share my screen for one quick second before we sign off, because I know a lot of people said they would still like to see the picture that we were talking about before. So you have that picture there for everybody. Again, Nadine, thank you. Denise, thank you. And thank you for joining us. We'll see everybody next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, Denise.
Bye.